First off, I'd like to go ahead and apologise for the fact that I haven't made this video for a long time. I wish I had an excuse, but I don't. You know, I'm just lazy, so, you know, whatever. I'm doing it now, so stop complaining. Well, you can complain a little bit if you want. So here we go. Exodus starts in Egypt, and the king of Egypt is a bit racist, and he really hates the Israelites for no reason really, apart from the fact that they're just plentiful in number. So he enslaves them all, like a bastard, and they all have to work in the pyramids and they're making shit. And the king also says, all the Hebrew babies, all the male Hebrew babies must be thrown into the Nile as soon as they're born. So the king is a real bastard and everyone hates him, but the Israelites don't really get to say anything because they're working slave labour and things like that. Moses is then born and his mother feels sorry for him, so she hides him. And when she can't hide him anymore, she puts him in a little basket and covers it in tar so that it's waterproof. And she puts him in the Nile. And the king's daughter, the princess of Egypt, comes along and she finds Moses in this little basket and she feels sorry for him yet again. So she keeps him. That's it really. The king's daughter finds Moses and takes care of him. Bit ironic really. And when Moses grows up, he goes to visit the Israelites. He sees that they're being slave driven. And he sees an Egyptian killing a Hebrew, and he gets really pissed off, so he kills the Egyptian and he hides him in the sand. What a nice guy. But then the Israelites are like, oh, you're gonna kill us too then, and Moses is like, oh no, they've found out. So he flees to a place called Midian, and there he's taken in by some shepherds. It's not really an important part of the story, but you know that he stays in Midian with some shepherd people. Now meanwhile, God above is sort of pissed off because he realises that the Israelites, who are the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and all that, you know, the crazy bunch back in Genesis, he kind of gets pissed because all the Israelites are being enslaved by the Egyptians. So he appears to Moses as a burning bush, and Moses is like, why isn't that burn catching a light? It's burning, but it's not really burning. So he goes up to the bush and God is like, Moses! I am the God of your ancestors, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And Moses covers his face because he's afraid of God, but God is like, don't be afraid, don't worry. So God tells Moses about the Israelites and their enslavement, and he tells Moses to go and save the Israelites from slavery. And Moses says to the Lord, he says, I can't do this, I'm merely a little man, they won't listen to me. And the Lord gives him a stick and says, this stick can do whatever, you know, you throw it on the floor, it will turn to a snake, and the Israelites will believe you. And Moses keeps on saying, what if they don't believe me, what if they don't believe me? And God keeps on giving him all these different miracles, saying, they'll believe you after this, they'll believe you after this. So Moses has got all these powers that he can do, and all the Israelites will believe him, basically. So then something very interesting happens. God tells Moses to go back to Egypt, and he says to perform all the miracles in front of the king of Egypt, but he'll make the king of Egypt very stubborn. Now, I didn't really understand this, because it's almost like God is saying, do this, but I'll make it difficult for you for no reason. It'll be like having an apprentice for a manual job, like, oh, I don't know, fixing cars or something, and saying, I'm going to give you this awesome spanner, but I'm also going to make all the nuts in the car a little bit bigger so that the spanner doesn't fit. What's the point of that? I mean, seriously, I'll make the king stubborn so that he doesn't listen to you. That's literally what it says. He says, I'll make the king stubborn so that he doesn't listen to you, but I'm still ordering to go and try and make him listen to you. Then something a little bit more creepy happens. On the way back to Egypt, he sets up camp, and it says, whilst on the way back to Egypt, in a camp outside of Egypt, the Lord meets Moses and tries to kill him. Why? And more importantly, his wife, cuts off his son's foreskin and touches Moses' feet with it. And apparently that saved him from God because, you know, that obviously makes sense. So after this massive escapade, God tells this guy called Aaron to meet Moses in the desert, and then they team up. And they go to Egypt and they get all the Israelites together and they go to the king and they tell the king everything that's happened. The king, of course, didn't know who God was, so he asks, who is the Lord? So the king, of course, is very stubborn because God made him that way, and he actually makes the workers work harder by getting all the materials for the bricks that they're making themselves instead of supplying them with the materials that they need. So the workers are being pushed a little bit harder, and Moses warns the king, if you don't let us go, if you don't let the Israelites go, then God will, you know, come down on you with disease and plagues and things like that. So they spend a long time trying to convince the king that they are from God, and Moses gives Aaron the stick and says, Aaron, throw down the stick and make a snake, so he does, and then the king is like, magicians, come here, do the same thing, and the magicians do. They come and they do the exact same thing that Moses and Aaron have done, so he thinks, no, you're not special in any way. So that's a bit weird, isn't it, how magicians exist. Just saying. So, as God predicted, the king hasn't actually done anything at all about the whole situation. So God commands Moses to warn the king that if he doesn't let him go, he'll turn all of the water in the land of Egypt into blood. And of course, because God made the king stubborn, he is stubborn. So Moses holds the stick over all the rivers and the seas in Egypt. I don't know whether it actually included the sea. Okay, let's just keep it simple. All the water in Egypt turned to blood, you know, all the drinking water, whatever. So then the same thing happens again, but this time with frogs. You know, Moses goes to the king and says, "You don't let us go, I'm going to rain frogs down on the land." And because the king is stubborn, he says, "No." So frogs come down. Same thing happens again with gnats. Same thing happens again with flies. Same thing happens again with all the Egyptian animals. So all the Egyptian animals die, Same thing happens again with boils, so all the Egyptian people get boils on them. And then there's hail on the land. It's just the same process, you know. Moses goes to the king and says, "Let us go, or this will happen," and the king, because he's stubborn, because God made him stubborn, says no. So Moses lets it happen. And finally, there's a plague of locusts, which is quite iconic, but the rest of the plagues weren't really that iconic. Actually, no, that wasn't finally. I thought it was, but it's not. It's darkness is the final punishment on the land. You know, Moses brings about loads of darkness, you know, whatever. And then there's a sort of grand, completely smashing thing that God does. He decides to kill all of the firstborn things in Egypt that belong to Egyptian people. What is his problem? You know, surely if he can make the king stubborn, he can make the king accepting as well. So he kills all of the firstborn things in Egypt, and everyone is in woe. It's not even just all the firstborn children. It's like cattle and lambs and sheep. Well, lambs are sheep, but whatever. And the king is distraught. He's completely destroyed, and he just says, "Whatever, get out of here, you stupid Israelites. Just leave." So all the Israelites and Moses leave Egypt. So a lot of uninteresting things happen. They leave Egypt, and God commands that they have some kind of festival where they eat bread without any yeast in it, for some reason, I don't know. Then God tells the Israelites that every firstborn male belongs to him, and they must buy him back. Wow, bloody hell. And they get to the Red Sea, and the Egyptians start coming after them. They somehow catch up with them with their chariots and horses and things like that. And then the Israelites start complaining. Ooh! They start shouting to the Lord, "Lord, why have you brought us out here?" Actually, they're sort of shouting at Moses, because Moses sort of represents the Lord to them. But they're sort of shouting at him like, "You've got us all killed, we're all going to die." And Moses is like, "Fear not." And he holds out his stick over the Red Sea, and God parts the Red Sea. Completely physically impossible. It says here that it's parted because winds are pushing in either direction. That's complete bullshit. So they walk through the Red Sea on the seabed, and the chariots coming after them because God made, you know, the king of Egypt stubborn, obviously, so he follows them. When the Israelites get to the other end, God says, "I want this to be an honour in my favour, so I'm going to put the Red Sea back in and drown all of the Egyptians." Now, I've got just one little nitpick on this. He says, "I want to get honour." Surely he has the most honour. Surely he has all the honour. He is God. He created everything. He can give himself honour. It's like printing honour. He can have as much as he wants. And why do these people not know who he is? Surely if he's omnipotent, he can do whatever he wants. He can make people know who he is because he's the Lord, obviously. And if he made everything, why does he need more honour? It's like he's like a control freak, and he just wants to do things for fun. So then they're celebrating because they're all alive, and they sing a little song to Moses. I don't really know how it goes, and even if I did, I wouldn't sing it for you bastards. Then there's a war with these people called the Amalekites, and Moses holds out his stick, and the Israelites win, but whenever he takes it down, they start losing. Don't really know why it's in there, but you know, so basically the Israelites as an army sort of crush these guys called the Amalekites. So they get to a place called Mount Sinai, and this is a holy mountain where God says, "I'm going to meet you, Moses, I'm going to meet you at the top." And there's a few ground rules, no pun intended, that need to be placed for the people of Israel if they're going to, you know, exist. So God says to the Israelites that if they even put one foot on the mountain, they will be killed, because God doesn't really want them to see him. Apart from Moses, he can. So Moses goes to the top of the mountain, and God talks to Moses, and he gives him a huge list of commandments. He gives him an initial 10, and people think that's all there is, but there's actually a lot more than that. It's just there's 10 main commandments. So everyone knows the commandments. I'm not going to read them out because, everyone knows them. And he gives him, Moses spends a very long time at the mountain. I'm not sure how long it is, but it's, long enough for people to forget about him. After he's given Moses the 10 commandments, he then gives him a few laws about altars. They're really weird laws, like you can't build an altar with steps on it because it will expose you if you walk up it. Basically, it just condones slavery. It says slavery is a-okay if you don't enslave anyone who's the same race as you. You can enslave people from, you can enslave enemies, but not Israelites because that's bad. Then it gives laws about violent acts. Some of them are sort of moral, but a lot more of them just sort of go over the top. Like if you curse your mother or your father, you're to be stoned to death. Then there's some laws about responsibility of owners, which goes into, if an owner owns a bull and the bull kills someone, then the bull is to be put to death, and there's some other ones where the owner is to be punished, but whatever. Then there's a very funny section, I think. It's the moral and religious laws. One is, if a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged, he must pay the bride price for her and marry her. Another one is, put to death any woman who practices magic. It doesn't say anything about men practicing magic, it's just women. On a side note, that's probably why in the 1600s witches were burnt. Because, they're women practicing magic, and it says not to do that in the Bible. Another one's pretty obvious. It says, put to death any man who has a sexual relationship with an animal, obviously. Then, near the end of his entire list, he's just saying, give me all your firstborn children, and all your firstborn sheep and things. Then he gives a whole lot of other laws about justice and fairness and things like that. A whole lot of uninteresting shit happens. There's a covenant between God and the Israelites. So Moses and others, like Aaron and the leaders of Israel, sort of ate with God, and God spared them because they saw God. So God said to Moses, come back up to a mountain, Mount Sinai, and bring 2 stone tablets, and I'll write down all the laws that I give to you. It doesn't say the 10 commandments, all the laws, about slavery and things like that. Then he gives him a whole lot more commandments to give to the Israeli people. It goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages. It's basically just like, he sounds like a 16-year-old high school girl from America just bitching about what he wants. First of all, he wants loads of offerings from the Israeli people, and he says in great detail what he wants, and they're really weird things like burnt animals. And he says the odour pleases him. That's cool, God. Then he wants a box to contain the commandments. Fair dues. It's called a covenant box. He wants it made out of gold, and he wants 2 winged creatures to be facing each other on a lid. Then he wants a table made for bread being offered to God. And he wants a lampstand for lamps to be stood outside of his tent that he wants. Then he describes exactly how he wants this tent to be made. So God tells Moses exactly how he wants his little tent to be made. The tent is called the Tent of the Lord's Presence. And it sounds so ridiculous. Exodus 26, the entire chapter is just God explaining to Moses how he wants his little crib to be made up. And it's ridiculous. He wants all of these different materials like goat skin and red wool and purple wool and all these linen things and bronze hooks and gold sewn things. And one thing, I don't understand how they got all the materials to make this amazingly huge and fantastic tent from. And secondly, why does God need this? Surely a little tent would be good enough. It's God. I'm sure he'll be able to function without all of his crap in his tent, like stuff that you just wouldn't even need, like a curtain. Why would you need that? And thirdly, surely God, if he's omnipotent, he'd be able to make this tent himself without having to further enslave the Israelites. And fourthly, Moses, how would he be noting all of this down? Does he have a little notepad with a pen? Oh yeah, God, okay, what else do you need? What else do you need? He tells him for an hour, just blabbering on about what he wants in this little tent. And how are we going to fit all of this stuff into his little tent, unless it's a giant tent, the size of, the Empire State Building or something. In 27, he starts to describe the enclosure to the tent. So it keeps on going for pages, and it's just God telling Moses what he wants, like a little bitch. And then the Israelites start to get a little bit suspicious. They start questioning whether Moses is ever going to come down from a mountain, because he's been up there so long listening to God's bullshit. So they ask Aaron to make a false god, an idol. So Aaron asks them for all of their jewellery, all the gold jewellery, and he melts it all down and puts it into a mould, a bull calf. And he makes like a golden bull calf symbol thing. So for one night they start worshipping this bull calf thing, which is a complete and utter sin against the Lord above. You'll be stoned for doing something like that. It goes against one of the 10 commandments, but they do it anyway. You know, they get this golden bull calf and they sit around a table and they drink and be merry. And then they have an orgy. So God learns of this and he gets pissed and he says, I'm going to kill them all. And Moses is like, no, don't kill them, forgive them. And God is like, oh, alright. So when Moses returns from Mount Sinai, he sees them all worshipping this bull calf and he gets so angry that he drops the 10 commandments and they break. As punishment for them worshipping this bull calf, he gets a bull calf and he grinds it into powder and he dissolves it in water and he forces the Israelites to drink the powdery water. So God was like, oh silly Moses, breaking the stone tablets, I'll make you another one, don't worry. So God renews a covenant after the people being complete utter penises from worshipping that bull calf. Then God tells them that they have to keep the Sabbath holy, because if they work on Sunday, they're to be stoned to death. You hear that, guys? God said to you guys, if you work on Sunday, you are to be stoned to death. So next time you go into your local town, you see someone working, grab a stone and throw it at their face and say, didn't you hear God said not to work today? So then people proceed to do exactly what Moses told them to. They make this special tent, they make the covenant box, they put the 10 commandments in it, they become priests and they worship God. So they set up the tent, which is apparently the most important part, they finish it and God is pleased with what they've done. And at the very end of this book, Exodus, a cloud appears over the tent of the Lord's presence. So basically this cloud signifies where they should be at one time. When the cloud moves, they move to the place where the cloud is, and if it doesn't move, they stay there. So that's the end. That's the end of Exodus. I hope you enjoyed this, because I didn't. You know, I thought that Exodus was going to be a lot more light-hearted than Genesis, as after all, as a child I was taught how brilliant Moses was and how he, you know, saved the Israelites. But no, it was, if anything, worse than Genesis. You know, it still had all the penis mutilations in it. It still had ridiculous punishments for things that didn't really deserve ridiculous punishments. But like Genesis, the storyline was actually pretty solid, I thought. So I'm going to give this book a 6 out of 10. Unnecessary violence and some pages and pages and pages just kept on dragging on with redundant information. So yeah, I do apologise greatly for the fact that I have left this video for such a long time, and I should be back to a mono-weekly schedule now that I'm, you know, bothered.